Good afternoon, Finance, Ways and Means Committee. It's back in session for the second time on March the 7th, 2022. Are there any personal orders or announcements before we get underway? Seeing none, we have our final budget presentation for the day. Our favorite deputy governor / commissioner is with us, along with several members of his staff. Thank you for taking your afternoon, and I know there's a little work going on budgets across in our body and in yours. So thank you for taking the time out to come today. And I think we had a technical issue, but I believe that your presentation is now on screen, and members, it is available on your dashboard. So Deputy Governor Ely will go with the highest title, and I'm sure the highest pay. We'll ask you to.
I don't think that made any difference.
Well, it's sort of like being a committee chair or, yeah,
That's right.
double the extra pay, right? But again, we'll just get underway. We do have a hard stop at 4:00, so we will ask you to present, and we'll have questions from our members.
Very
So,
good.
Commissioner Ely.
Very good. Thank you, Chair Hazelwood, members of the committee. I am Butch Ely with F&A, and appreciate this opportunity to talk with you today about F&A's budget for fiscal year 23. With me today are several people that I think you all know who will help guide the conversation today. Here with me is Deputy Commissioner Eugene Newbert, Governor Lee's Policy Director, Tony Nicknajad. We've got with me here behind me, F&A Controller Valencia Hill, Chief Information Officer Stephanie Dedman, our Office of Evidence and Impact Director, Kristen Lotz, and of course, our State Budget Director, David Thurman. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say how much support that we have from all of our dedicated staff across the state. F&A, as you know, is a shared service department, and we serve other departments so that they can serve our people in Tennessee. And today you'll see that F&A's budget is focused on continuing the strong customer relationships that we have with agencies in the most efficient and advanced services possible. But now more than ever, we recognize, as you do, and as we talked, that we anticipate future demands in a way that we never have before. And what this means in large part for us is technology. Technology is a huge part of the equation, along with growing our use of data in order for us to be able to work smarter and for us to be able to make policy and budget decisions that make sense. You'll also see, and Tony will talk about F&A's role in another of the governor's key issues, our criminal justice reform package. So now I'm going to turn it over to our Deputy Commissioner, Eugene Newbert, who's going to walk through our proposed increases.
Thank you, Commissioner. Madam Chair, members, on the next two slides, you'll see our total budget of cost increases are $217.6 million. That includes $178 million from state appropriations and would authorize 29 new positions for the department. Of that $178 million, $175.3 is for 2 criminal justice programs that, as Commissioner mentioned, Tony's going to touch on those in a lot more detail here in a few minutes. I will note and want to say and go on the record, 9 of the positions are associated with our budget request are for those 2 programs. And we're committed to when the funding for those programs expire, we will abolish those positions. of and take those off the rolls. So skipping the first two items, just moving to number three, that $15 million of federal funds, that's just aligning federal funds in the Office of Criminal Justice Programs with the anticipated funding for next fiscal year. Items 4 through 7 are upgrades to support the growing technology that we're providing to agencies and citizens in Tennessee, including routine equipment replacement, maintenance and modernization, along with a rate adjustment for STS. Items 8 and 9 on this slide are for the Office of Evidence and Impact. OEI continues to get recognition for helping the state use data to make budget and policy decisions. Tennessee is one of the top 7 states in the nation for our use of data. OEI works closely with our budget office to help agencies look at the data around outcomes, so we continue to invest in only what is proven to work. $2.1 million of this increase will provide recurring funding for 4 full-time positions and operational costs, and the $2 million for enterprise data analytics will grow the state's evidence-based data collection as well as cross-agency data sharing. Lastly, on this slide, Tennessee is one of 8 states in the nation with a mobile app that provides personalized service delivery to Tennesseans through a single point of access on mobile devices 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. MyTN offers more than 5 dozen services. We launched the app a couple years ago and have slowly grown the services and the number of users. The $300,000 requested here will allow us to reach more Tennesseans by marketing the availability and functionality of the app. Moving to slide 3, this continues our cost increases with allocation for filling positions and operations in F&A divisions of capital accounting, our Office of Talent Management, the Division of Administration, as well as providing recurring funding in Volunteer Tennessee, a program that's administratively attached to F&A that will allow us to leverage additional federal funds. Before I hand it over to Tony, wanted to just give a very, very high level reminder overview about the Office of Criminal Justice Programs. This office will be critical to operationalizing the 2 programs that Tony will speak to. And I won't read the slide to you, but I will point out that 3rd bullet that in fiscal year 21, OCJP distributed over $85 million in grants to 600 recipient local government, state agencies, and not-for-profits, focusing primarily in the areas of criminal justice and victim services. Tony?
Thank you, Eugene. Tony Nicknajad, Governor's Office. The next 2 slides I will speak to will give you more information about funding for 2 of the governor's public safety initiatives. A 3rd major initiative that you will hear have heard the governor speak about, the law enforcement hiring, training, and recruiting initiative, is within the budget for Department of Commerce and Insurance, and it will be administered through their law enforcement programs. That involves multiple benefits for recruiting and staffing that are not addressed in these programs here that I'll be speaking to today. The governor believes strongly that the most effective tool for addressing violent crime is to invest in resources for law enforcement that support the prevention and arrest of criminals before they can hurt or create another victim. Today, Tennessee's 95 counties vary in financial situations and their individual ability to invest in local public safety initiatives. But as a priority of the governor, this recommended budget provides for new resources for law enforcement to help address public safety. Within the Department of F&A, a grant fund of $150 million will be administered to help local law enforcement agencies implement evidence-based practices to improve public safety and improve their ability to effectively prevent criminal behavior. The Violent Crime Intervention Grant Fund will support a multi-year partnership between the state and participating law enforcement agencies to fund strategies that will effectively improve policing and reduce the incidence of crime in the state. F&A's OCJP will administer these grants based on applications that satisfy allowable uses. Those uses will be laid out based on evidence-driven guidelines that we'll ask the law enforcement agency to provide detail and demonstrate to us. OCJP will also require regular reporting on the use of these funds and program outcomes. If every law enforcement agency in the state were to participate and receive funding, the average award amount would be one-time funding of approximately $357,000. However, we know that participation will vary, and we will require agencies to develop and submit applications built around intentional strategies that reduce crime and will demonstrate their strategy for reducing crime in their community. An additional value add of this program will be that the reporting structure established by OCJP will allow us to evaluate that evidence and look retrospectively and identify those strategies that worked and are call for greater investment by the state or local communities going forward. If we can move to the next slide. The next initiative is an expansion of a successful program launched in fiscal year 21. This is the Reentry Success Grant Program. This program pairs with the Reentry Success Act passed by the General Assembly in 2021 and is designed to support local anti-recidivism efforts that are delivered and implemented in our local county jails. More than 60% of felony offenders are released from our local jails, many of which have little to no pre-release education or rehabilitative programs that help them succeed upon reentry. That is a recipe for recidivism and something that we are working to address here at the state level. The Reentry Success Grant Program is designed to help address that population. Round one of this program provided $5 million in reimbursement grants in proportion to accredited educational investments made by local jails. However, the limited amount of funds required us to take a more narrow approach to those eligible uses, which meant that many vocational training investments, particularly capital investments, were unable to qualify. With a $25 million investment recommended by the governor for consideration by the General Assembly, we will be able to provide for more physical facility improvements in these local jails for the purpose of implementing these education and rehabilitation programs. Along with the grants for classroom space, staffing, and programs, this would also allow support for vocational training type programs such as apprenticeship opportunities that are approved by the Department of Labor and Workforce Development in partnership with a local business or employer. Finally, there is an additional value add to these grants that these will also provide us with data and the ability to evaluate which strategies worked and didn't work and give us the ability to target effectively programming going forward at the state and local level. With these two investments, the state of Tennessee can remain at the forefront of evidence-based policy approaches that can result in improved criminal justice outcomes for Tennessee.
Very good. Thank you, Tony. I'm going to hit technology a little bit more and then turn it over to you for questions. While, as you know, this is F&A's budget request, I think it's important for us to all remember that a lot of what we're doing at F&A is enterprise-wide that involves all of the departments. And so certainly one of the things that we all have to be aware of, careful of, is that we don't fall behind as it relates to technology. Our increases in technology are what we call our 5 buckets. And today with me here is Stephanie Dedman, who can get into greater detail on any of these items certainly than I can. But we realize that we are at an inflection point on a number of issues as it relates to technology. It's not a new thing for F&A or for STS to be trying to get ahead of the curve as it relates to technology. You know, we had an office before STS that was the Office of Information Technology back in technology back in 2016, and so it's important that we keep ahead of this game. One of the things that we have leaned into very strongly is the use of data to continue a more evidence-based approach to all of our policy and investments that we're making in the state. We do a great job, I think, of collecting data through the various departments through the state. We're doing a better job and have made huge strides, especially using cloud-based technology to be able to store data. But one of the areas that we need to continue improving, as we have discussed before, is the cross utilization. How do we actually use this data to be more effective for the people in Tennessee? To put this in a little bit of perspective, we're dealing with over 1,000 programs. If you look at all of our departments and all of our agencies, we've got about 1,200 different programs that these departments administer year in, year out, spending over $30 billion worth of our financials, taxes. And as you think about that, we need to make sure that we're accountable and they are accountable as these dollars are spent. And so whatever we can do to be more evidence-based, using programs that work and are proven to work, are something that we want to continue to strive to do. Second area is process improvement. It's kind of a fancy name for using technology to automate more tasks across state government. There are a lot of long and tedious processes that take a lot of employee hours to perform. And if we can automate some of these processes, our employees can spend their time focusing on actions that lead to more and better outcomes instead of these lengthy processes. Third, the cloud technology I've already talked about a little. This is simply using the internet to access storage, programs, data files, software, and servers through connected devices that help save time. Also is cybersecurity. I don't have to tell you how important this is becoming. It's been important for a number of years and something that we've continued to focus on. But as we know, with the state of world events, this continues to be a very important item that we stay on top of and continue to plan ahead for security measures in the future. And then lastly, our fifth bucket is kind of infrastructure and modernization of our processes and switches. This involves refreshing those switches every few years in a 3 to 5 year time frame. And so we typically budget, you typically budget somewhere between $87 and $112 million annually for the overall spend, depending upon the projects that are in the queue, in flight, being handled through SDS. The portfolio stands today that our office is working on is 354 projects. Most of those are very small departmental projects, but there's about 20 projects that are $5 million or over. And so it's important for us certainly to stay on top of those projects and make sure that we have the resources to keep those modernized. In closing and opening for questions, I want to thank you again for this opportunity to be before you today. If we don't know the answer, we'll get the answer and hopefully be able to answer all your questions. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Governor. Before we get started with the other questions, just a quick question on the first slide with the MyTN app. What is the usage on that currently?
300?
43,000 users currently.
So 43,000 separate users who might engage multiple times. Right, thank you. Chairman Hicks.
Thank you, Chair Lady and Commissioner Ely. Thank you and your staff and your team for being here. Just you mentioned SDS and technologies, and so we're going to kind of stick with that theme for just a few minutes with the questions that I have. This first question is referring back to the $197 million through the ARP funds, and if my understanding is correct and what you've mentioned, these funds were for the cloud, cybersecurity, infrastructure projects. And so my questions are, is funding from the ARP being utilized for cybersecurity liability insurance coverage? And if so, are these funds being utilized in conjunction with the treasurer's captive insurance plan?
No, the money that we've, and Stephanie may be able to go into a little more detail, the actual cybersecurity dollars that are requested or were authorized for FSAG are for tools, not buying into to the insurance plan.
Okay, the proposed budget also includes 2 million recurring for cybersecurity training and assessments for local governments. Are any of the ARP funds allocated to STS being utilized to help local governments and their cybersecurity needs?
Let me start and then let Stephanie jump in. One of the things that we recognize is that one of the places that we're most vulnerable, which is not surprising, certainly because many of our localities do not have the, I guess, back office that is necessary to be able to keep in front of some of these cyber issues. And so we certainly are trying to work with them in providing information and helping them to ensure that they have the resources to try to prevent these. Stephanie, do you want to go into more detail on that?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry, Representative Hicks. Yes, with the ARPA
And
projects.
just for the record, although we all know you, if you would identify yourself, please.
I'm so sorry. Yes, Stephanie Dedman, Chief Information Officer with STS within FNA. Thank you. Yes, we have a number of projects that we want to work on with the local governments, including doing assessments from where, and there's a national standard to assess sort of where they are from a cybersecurity coverage, what are the risks, and then, then kind of look at the totality of that information to figure out what remediation we might need to do with those local governments. We also want to, as part of those funds, offer what is sometimes called CISO as a service, and that CISO is our Chief Information Security Officer. So the services that we are providing to the agency, to state agencies, we also want to potentially be able to offer some of those services to those local governments who don't have the resources or potentially dollars to provide some of those services.
Okay. Chair Lady.
Chairman Hicks.
So the budget also includes 24 million in other funding for STS projects such as enterprise network, switches refresh, enterprise IT modernization, STS rate review, and enterprise data analytics. Can the department please explain the source other funding and how this funding corresponds with the increases in state funding through miscellaneous appropriations provided for the same purposes?
Certainly, STS and most of FNA is actually funded through interdepartmental transactions charging for our services to other state agencies. So that falls into the other category. You will see, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there are associated cost increases in miscellaneous appropriations and of state dollars. And what that is when we charge back or we increase the charges to state agencies, for those that are funded with general fund state dollars, we budget for those increases and we'll spread those dollars to those state agencies that need it, while also leveraging those state agencies that are funded with federal dollars. We'll be able to draw on federal dollars for those agencies.
And my final question, the pandemic has resulted in many state employees continuing to work from home. So my question is, how has the increased number of state employees working from home, how has it impacted the state's cybersecurity and the overall efficiency of the computer systems utilized by state departments?
Yes, we have implemented some additional tools for so that we can monitor the state employee access and work from home. And so we have, that was part of our funding from last year, I believe, is to implement some of those tools. We find great efficiency across the workforce that is continuing to work from home, but continue to evaluate tools and what else we need to implement to make sure we continue to be able to protect our network and our data and access to systems. So we've been able to to implement the appropriate tools to help us better monitor and control access.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Lady. Thank you all.
Leader Lamberth, you're next on the list.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And as you can imagine, I would like to talk about some of the grant funding to reduce violent crime and to go toward our local jails. So, Mr. Nick Najad, these are probably questions best for you, but anybody that wants to chime in, please do so. I know the department received $5 million in the fiscal year 21-22 budget to provide funding for county jails, as you referenced earlier, for evidence-based programming for reentry into local communities. This proposed budget also includes 4 positions with FNA and $25 million of non-recurring for a second round of reentry grants, and an additional $150 million for non-recurring for violent crime intervention grants, just to kind of summarize what we're talking about here. Can you give us an update on how the $5 million has gone for reentry grants thus far, and how many local jails received those grants? What was their success level? And I know we're early into it, so I'm not expecting a 3-year recidivism rate or anything of that nature, but what are we seeing as far as how that grant process went thus far, and has it been successful before we re-up to the tune of about 5 times that amount?
And I may have to provide you more detail on a written report, but I can give you the high points. There were 23 grants provided, approximately $4 million that went out the door. We are expecting and preparing for the additional $1 million to be released with after confirmation of this additional funding. It's there pending application. And what we saw in those 23 grants were primarily education initiatives focused around adult basic education. Literacy was something we heard as a major concern from our local jail partners, and something that they work to integrate with local partners into their programming.
Lamberth,
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Do you mind if I go back and forth a little bit?
No.
Thank you.
right ahead.
Are there not other programs out there, if it was primarily education-based, are there not other programs that this could have fit within? Why does this need to be a dedicated fund?
In terms of other criminal justice programs that support
Just other programs in general, sorry. I mean, like, I know there are
Uh.
lots of programs out there that help folks to be able to get their high school equivalency, to get their college degree, to get certifications, and we have a number of programs and buckets of money that we put in. What is different about this particular grant fund that provides it in a better way than those programs?
What this fund provides is resources for the jail itself. So what we saw is, for instance, jails they have staff dedicated to correctional purposes, but they don't have someone who's dedicated to coordinating that work. That's something that they, at the local county level, haven't seen as a priority investment, or something that, in the mix of every budget priority, just hasn't risen to the level of something they've invested in. So that's the main difference. But what it does by giving those resources to those local jails is it allows them to more effectively leverage that. With this new expansion of funds, we're anticipating investments in physical space and improvements that allow for classroom space. That would actually be a pretty unique capability. We're not aware of other funding sources that would provide for that.
And on that, what do you consider success of both the $5 million that's already out there and the 25 that we're allocating? What is the metric that we should be looking at if, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the road, we're looking back at this investment, which is a significant investment? What is success?
I think what we start with is a baseline of what is the recidivism rate for these particular facilities, and give us an ability to see where there are meaningful reductions in that rate. It does come down to implementation, and so that's something that we, once these grants go out, want to stay in contact, make sure these county jails are accessing those resources effectively, spending the money wisely. And that's something that we'll look back on as our measure for success.
Is that what the 4 positions are for, to monitor this program?
Yes, sir. They would be not playing an administrative role, and also supporting those jails and questions that may come up from time to time.
And I have one other area I'm going to go into with the $150 million. Before I go to that, let me ask more of just kind of a policy question on this. If we know that the recidivism rate of those that come out of a local jail and are being locally housed state felony prisoners is much higher, to the tune of 10% plus, than those that are coming out of state facilities, why on earth do we house state inmates in local jails? Why would we do that if we know for decades the results have been worse?
I think that's a great question. I think it's something that's probably has a lot of history and inertia behind it. I think there's probably 2 factors. If I had to speak out loud about those, I think one is that there's been historically, the state can only house so many prisoners. I think there's staffing and physical limitations. I think building more prisons is something it requires a great deal of resources to do, and it's something that at the same time these local facilities have to exist. They have to provide this function for local offenders, and in many cases, a lot of these local jails will build their budget around those state sentence offenders that are housed there. So it's a partnership that, for better or for worse, it's what we have, and we want to make sure that partnership gets better, so that they have the resources they need to deliver the same level of programming, or close to the same level of programming we can deliver at a state facility.
So TDOC was in here a couple of weeks ago, and we had this back and forth, and it's been quite some time since we've built a new state facility. I think the conversation that we had with them, and I think collectively, I think the feeling is that it's probably time to start looking at those facilities and ensure that if we're going to be doing reentry, if we're going to be doing programming, if we're going to have programs like work release or anything else, the facilities we have at the state level simply do not provide for that, and neither of the local jails is going to be able to. So just something to continue to look at. We've also set money aside, and this committee has looked at it for years, that the fiscal notes were designed in a way to set money aside for new prisons, and yet have not been allocated towards that. So just something to keep in mind. If we're not seeing the results that we need, then maybe we should be doing this a different way and investing state dollars for state inmates so that we get a better result. On that, and pivoting to this other topic here, the violent crime intervention grants. How exactly will these be dispersed? What will the 5 positions within FNA be responsible for? And is there any kind of a match with local funds there? Like, what are we, I mean, that's a huge sum of money, 150 million. And trust me, we need it. I mean, I'm in favor of it, but what is that going to look like specifically within those 3 areas?
Yeah, it is a significant sum of money. Our thought process is that distributed across the state, we want it to have enough in that fund so that there could be a meaningful impact at the individual level. And so in terms of how it will be administered, what we've designed is an application process. So what the staff of the OCJP would do with the additional resources would provide for pre-application guidance to our local law enforcement agencies. Many of them, I shouldn't say many actually, but a significant fraction of them are familiar with the grant process, but we know many are not. When we see the Justice Assistant Grant programs come out from the Burn program at the federal level every year, we usually see the same list of law enforcement agencies participating. And we know there are several law enforcement agencies, particularly those in rural and distressed counties, for whom they have not had the wherewithal or ability to quite get into the mix for these types of programs. So that's going to be, that pre-application guidance will be a critical function for OCJP and something that they have provided in the past with other programs. That then comes the application phase. The applications come in, we look for narrative, we have a back and forth with that law enforcement agency, say, what are the crime trends in your community? For instance, we look at Shelby County. We know there are high rates of vehicle-related crime like carjacking. So we may say, how does this address that particular trend spike that you're seeing in your local community, and have that back and forth so that it's well designed, not to meet something that is a want, but something that is a need. And then should we have more applications and funding available, which is a real possibility, we then have a competitive scoring process, which the staff would apply with their guidelines.
And again, do you anticipate that there's a local match to those funds?
Oh, I apologize. I didn't answer that question. No, we're not anticipating a local match at this time. Certainly something that as a policy matter, we're open to discussion on it, but it's not something we wanted this investment to be. We wanted to see local match in the form of resources and staffing work that we know these law enforcement agencies are committing.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Just a couple of follow-ups on Leader Lambert's question. $150 million is a lot of money, but when you start spreading across the state, it doesn't go as deeply as one might think. So are these grants, are they given on a first come, first served basis? I mean, I'm sure that some of our metropolitan areas, I know you said an average of $357,000. Are you going to start out with, is that as a max, or how is that going to work in terms of attempting to make sure that every law enforcement agency across the state has an opportunity to avail themselves of at least some funding?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point and something that we take very seriously when we design grant programs for agencies to administer. We ask for those agencies to make sure there's really effective outreach out to all the potential stakeholders before we open and close the deadlines. One of the ways that we get around the risk of, first come, first serve or funding to those who may not need it the most is by having a solid application window during which local county officials, state legislators, local law enforcement agencies are all made aware of this announcement of funds opportunity. And in that window, we solicit those applications after which they're scored against each other.
And so, and I don't know that it's a question of need. I'm sure some of the larger, areas would need the additional dollars as well. But at the close of your window, if your applications, if you have money left over, then what is the plan? Are you going to reopen the application process, or how will that be addressed?
We anticipate this being a multi-year investment. When we think about the scenario where these funds may not be all expended in the first round, we think about having multiple rounds available so that if an agency, despite our best efforts, doesn't get to participate in the first round, there's a subsequent round that they can have access to.
And one final question, then I'll move on. I'm sorry to kind of monopolize questions here for a moment, but that was a pretty staggering number. We just sort of skipped right over it. The first bullet point about the violent crime, the fact that it increased by 13% between 2019 and 2020. That's generated a lot of victims, a lot of loss in the state. Do we have 21 numbers yet? Do we know if the trend is improving or?
I would have to check the notes. I did see something very recently, but I don't know if it's official or not. But if I'm recalling correctly, it wasn't the increase there was not an additional increase, but I'd have to confirm my notes and get back to you on that.
If you could, thank you. Chairman Crawford.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. I want to talk a little bit about the Office of Evidence and Impact. Last year, 4 new positions were created within the office. This year, the proposed budget is $2.1 million, reoccurring for 4 additional positions and operational costs to further cross the agency data sharing. Can the department provide information on current cross-agency sharing and how this funding will further move the mission?
Yeah, I think we can. I'm going to let Kristen get into more detail as to how we're going about that. But Chairman, I think that when I think about that $30 billion that's going, that's in our base budget that goes out every year, much of the focus of these hearings is always on the new dollars that are being spent. And that's significant. I mean, we need to be focused on the 150 million of new dollars that we're talking about today. But we also need to be talking about and thinking about the 30 billion that is embedded in our ongoing budget. And that's really the focus of this Office of Evidence and Impact, making sure that we are working with each of our departments in ensuring that they are creating programs and that they are going about making sure that there is evidence behind the work that they are doing. And in many cases, there are different levels of evidence that Kristen can talk about. And we're not necessarily saying that we've got to have this 20 years of track record of evidence to be able to fund any particular program, because there's a lot of programs out there that may not have evidence yet that we still know, anecdotally at least, that are very good. And so the issue though is that we need to make sure that we have accountability and that we make sure that we're spending these dollars as wisely as possible. And so that's the purpose behind this. It's a relatively small investment when it comes to making sure that we're spending these dollars wisely. Kristen?
Sure. Kristen Lotz, I'm the Director of the Office of Evidence and Impact for FNA. And as Commissioner Ely stated, the mission of our office is really to just ensure that we're using to the best of our ability data and evidence to drive both policymaking and budgeting for the executive branch. To the enterprise data analytics question in particular, that is one of our primary areas of work that we are thankful to be able to partner with STS on. And we've made a lot of progress since we were before you last year. We were able to utilize the initial funding that we had for that particular program to engage the services of a vendor. That vendor has completed a current state analysis of our enterprise data analytics capabilities and has made some recommendations to us as well to improve our ability to share data between our departments so that we're really able to gain those cross-functional insights into whether or not our programs are working. And Stephanie, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Chairman Crawford?
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. You kind of described my next question was how is this data going to be utilized to make things better? And you kind of touched on it, but can you go any more on there?
Sure. So a part of our work in our office is to determine the level of evidence that exists for our current programs, so the programs that comprise our base budget. But what we found is in a lot of cases, we don't have a whole lot of real tangible research evidence behind the programs that we are providing. Sometimes the information is more anecdotal in nature, as Commissioner Ely said. So we're really trying to not only catalog the existing data and evidence that we have for the programs where we have that information available, but also build evidence to, again, help us understand whether or not these programs are having the outcomes that we are intending them to have. So with that said, we are, again, just really focusing on kind of breaking down the silos, if you will, between our agencies in order to, in a very secure way that always places privacy as the top priority, use data to conduct analytics on very specific policy use cases. So we will have a policy question that we need answered, that it requires data from multiple agencies. And so through this enterprise data analytics work and this project, we're beginning to be able to have a secure environment to do that analysis.
Can you give an example, Kristen? Give an example of kind of a real life example of what that looks like.
Sure. So we've done a couple of pilot projects, and Stephanie, of course, is welcome to speak to this as well. What we are actually just kind of getting ready to start on in the coming months will be a project. For example, one of the things that we have sort of in the hopper is around opioids. As we all know, especially in recent years, we've seen big increases in the number of individuals who have overdosed, who have perished as a result of opioids, fentanyl in particular. And so that's an area where, to get the full picture, we really need to be able to leverage data from multiple agencies.
Chairman Crawford?
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. And finally, I noticed in the original request that y'all had asked for 8 positions. And how will that affect your data sharing, and how will that affect you if you only get the 4?
Sure. I appreciate that question, but I think especially on the enterprise data analytics work, since we are able to partner with a vendor to do the bulk of that work, I think we are totally fine there. With the 4 positions that I do have in the governor's proposed budget, I do intend to add 1 additional data scientist to the team to help support that work. We have 2 currently. So I feel like we'll be in pretty good shape.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady.
Representative Garrett, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, guys, for being here. We really appreciate it. My question involves some of the funds that we received from the federal government, the CARES Act and the ARP, the American Rescue Act. As you know, we received $2.3 billion in the CARES Act funding and then close to $3.4 billion from the ARP. My questions are, what challenges have the department faced in allocating this funding, and how have those challenges been addressed so far?
I'll start and then let Eugene or Tony, who are both more expert than I am on this topic. But I will just say that we've been fortunate in Tennessee to have the Financial Stimulus Accountability Group that has been at work here in helping to oversee the use of those funds. And so many states sat around for a long time, frankly, fighting about what to do or how to do it. And through the purview of that committee or that group, we were able to all work together, both sides of the house and both parties, in being able to come to really a consensus and agreement on being able to utilize the spending of those dollars. And what we found is that there were more requests and more needs out there than even the 2.3 that we had with the CRF funds. And so even though that what we looked at is prioritizing those areas where we could get dollars directly in the hands of the people that needed it most, through the stimulus programs and the small businesses that we tried to help as a result of that. And as you know, I think from our conversations last year, we put a big effort in keeping our unemployment trust fund at a level to where we didn't have to put, in addition to everything else they were going through, businesses into having to raise their unemployment taxes in being able to keep the trust fund at a level where we didn't have to do that. And that was over $900 million of that fund. And so I think we very intentionally, through working with FSAG, were able to utilize those funds. We've now, by the way, closed that initial fund totally closed now. When did we close? Was that the end of?
End of calendar year 21, end of 21, we're finalizing our reporting to Treasury over the next several months.
Yeah. So that's been very successful. We're of course now into the second fund, and we've allocated all but about 600 million or so that is still unallocated that we're working now to finalize.
Good deal. Thank you for that. And of course, a lot of these funds have a lot of strings attached for the local folks to either start projects or not start projects. And of course, a little bit worried about what we may be responsible for as a state versus what we may not be responsible for. So my question is, what measures have we taken to mitigate any future increase in state costs associated with projects that have been initiated under these two plans, so we make sure we're not being liable down the road for things that we can't complete?
Representative, I think that's a great question and something that's been front and center since the start of this. There are two major risks associated with these funds. The first is they are non-recurring. So by definition, they will run out, and programs, resources developed around these funds will reach a cliff, at which point there will either state funding will have to be provided for it to continue it, or a decision will have to be made to exit out or end the program. So that's something that we are very upfront with grantees. We're upfront with agencies, and very try to emphasize in this planning and really try to focus on what are truly temporary expenses or one-time expenses. The second major risk, as you pointed out, with federal strings and particularly with a new shift in administration, is liability. The federal government does not pre-certify. They do not approve ahead of time uses of these funds. And you can go years before an audit finding that says, well, we don't agree that was really a COVID-related response. And of course, hindsight being the benefit of 2020, you end up having to litigate or argue with these federal granting agencies about whether or not you have to pay back potentially tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars. So we have a very rigorous pre-expenditure review We have contracted with a vendor, FNA has, with a vendor to help provide that compliance review. And then we've also leveraged that contract, and I want to brag on Eugene over here, to provide a local government technical assistance program as well, because in addition to those funds you described, there have been $2.2 billion distributed by the United States Treasury directly to our local governments, regardless of their size. So we're seeing some communities of 800, 900 population getting hundreds of thousands of dollars that they did not ask for, with significant liability risk attached to it. So I think Eugene could probably speak to the local government technical assistance program and some of the great work done over there.
Sure. So, yeah, I think I'm on. So yeah, that's a good point, Tony. The local government technical assistance program, leveraging the consultant that we have on board at our cost, so no cost to the local governments. We set up this past fall, and we did a similar process under the Coronavirus Relief Fund back in 2020. But we set up a weekly webinar series where we had, I guess it was around 11 webinars talking about the eligibility for the American Rescue Plan dollars that they would be receiving or had received. We've also set up a spending plan review. So totally optional to the local governments, not just the smaller local governments that we distributed their funds, but also counties and the larger metro governments, where they can submit a plan to us for how they intend on using their ARPA dollars. We'll review that plan and provide them written feedback as to whether or not it appears, based on our understanding, our consultants' understanding of the Treasury guidelines, that proposed use is indeed eligible. We've structured that in a way twofold. One, to make sure that we can understand what it is they want to do and where it falls from an eligibility standpoint, but also if it is eligible, it's structured in a way that they basically just have to lift and shift, cut and paste, if you will, from the plan that they submit to us to the plans that they'll have to submit to Treasury. To just try and make it a little easier. They do maintain the ultimate fiscal responsibility, but at least there's a level of assurance that we've looked at it and have said that it appears to be eligible.
Very good, very good. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it.
Chairman Baum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know we just have a minute, so I'll just ask one question. The budget proposal includes $15 million to recognize additional federal funding for the criminal justice program. Can you tell us a little bit about how that increase is going to be used and how we're going to utilize the 2 new positions for that?
Sure. I'll probably have to get back to you, one, because we're out of time, and two, because I'm going to need to get some subject matter experts. Really what that's doing is federal funding that we're already receiving in large part programs. It's just aligning that funding into next fiscal year so that we have the authority to spend what we anticipate receiving. But I'm happy to get a lot more detail from our Office of Criminal Justice Program to let you know what those are and how those will be used.
That'll be fine. Thank you.
If you could just provide that to my office and we'll distribute it to the committee. We have 2 other questions on the list. I would ask to be brief in both question and response because we need to get out of here in 2 minutes. Chairman Wendell.
This question is from a student at Tennessee Tech, and she requested I ask this question. What impact have cyber criminals had on the federal transfer funds for our COVID relief funds to the state of Tennessee, such as the Department of Labor unemployment compensation? And she wants to know if have cyber criminals attacked our institutions or our fund balances, and if so, how, and if have they been successful?
Yes, sir. We're not aware of any particular attacks related to our federal funding. We do, and we are careful about how we talk about our cybersecurity risks, but I'm not aware of any particular hacks or events affecting our process or our network.
In particular, the Department of Labor,
Yes,
I've seen this billions of dollars been lost in most states. Have we been immune to that?
My understanding largely, yes. There were some early concerns about fraud, but I do not believe they were cyber related.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Miller, your last question, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Very quick question. We applaud you for what you're doing. I understand the intention of what you want to do with the programs. Only thing I wanted to ask is that, did you consider at all any funding or programs as it relates to juvenile justice reform?
You want to take that?
Yes, sir. I think that's one of the things that we really want to partner with law enforcement on. It's a concern that we've heard, and something that would be an area that we would certainly look for applications that attempt to address that. I think violence interruption or violence intervention, partnerships with nonprofits that engage with youth before they become more hardened, and that is something that is within the scope of what we're considering.
Thank you, Deputy Governor, and all those who are with you. We appreciate it. We probably have more questions, but as I said, we have a hard stop. Thank you for the work that's been done. And at some point, I would like to have a better understanding. We throw around the words evidence-based a lot, but just a real definition of what that is and how we know it's evidence-based. And I think there was some general conversation around that in some of the questions today, but I'd like to dig a little deeper into that if we could.
We'd
With
love to
that,
get you some more information on that. And
thank you.
Yeah.
With that, we stand adjourned.
thank you. Appreciate it.